Hi, I'm David Bogie, and I want to talk to you about some theories I've created a long time ago. The notion of the anti-narrative, the stuff that's left out of a grand narrative. But today I want to talk to you about something called Microstoria. It was in my 2001 book, and I've turned it into kind of a way to open our loving heart to work with communities that are divided, or families divided, or organizations often divided in conflict. So let me put on a clearer set of glasses, put my cap on. Let's get into it. So what we're talking about here is came out of the True Storytelling book in 2021 with Jens Larsen, Lena Brun, and myself. And we had this True Storytelling principles. And behind the scenes were the 7 anti-narrative Bs: the beneath, the before, the bets on the future, the being, becoming, the between, and the beyond. That didn't really get developed until the book with Ronnie Sailors in 2023. Now, so we want to talk today about beyond the big story, the power of a new concept I'm calling microstorying, and how it can help with community healing of dividedness, families divided, organizations divided, communities divided. So it's all about the little wow moments, of course, gathering those up, finding points of where people can talk to each other across the divides. And it goes through phases like listening, mapping out the anti-narrative Bs, restoring processes with coaches, and quantum storytelling together, just noticing how we're all entangled with one another. And in the video I'm going to show you, it's all about the storying spiral, S-T-O-R-Y-I-N-G. That's a verb, an action verb. So it's a way of conflict de-escalation. De-escalate the conflicts, open the hearts, put on the heart glasses, bring your heart up into your head. Get rid of the war stories, the blame games, the interests and needs of the individualism, me-first society, and get into dialogue, get into the heart stories. How can this storying spiral be an open heart by ditching the war stories, blame games, and individualist interests and needs? Well, we need to get into the microstoria. It was invented by the Italians. I featured it in my 2001 book, and it's in chapter 3 if you go to that book. And microstories are non-linear, they're fragmented, they're little people's histories. Little people get left out of the history books. You and I are never going to be in the history books. It'll be generals, presidents, CEOs, heads of foundations, etc., rock stars. And so we're kind of marginalized. But yet we do, the little people, speak back to power, and we're an anti-narrative inconvenience out there. And it's related to quantum storytelling because it's the past, present, and future coming in on one another in entanglement. The result is, let's gather up the anti-narrative discards on the editing floor, those little wow moments, and let's do what the Italian microstorians did. They adopted pragmatism of Charles Saunders Peirce and the methodology of the induction of cases, the deduction of what was going on, the abduction, the wild guesses, and the intuitions. Now there's 4 main characters in the Italian microstoria that not going to be mentioned in the film that's coming up. Carlo Ginzburg, Giovanni Levi, Carlo Poni, and Eduardo Grandi. They each were pragmatists in their own way. I'd say Carlo Ginzburg, more than anybody, sort of picked up something very parallel to Charles Saunders Peirce's pragmatism. Giovanni Levi looked at detailed household accounts in archives and the failure of more macro systems to correct larger social scientific models. Carlo Ponti emphasized a non-elitist practice perspective in his pragmatism, traces ordinary artisans and producers through material traces, archivally in wage lists and production records to recover hidden economic actors. Then Eduardo Grandi, or Grindy, you might pronounce it, insights the subversive liberatory potential of Microstoria. He analyzes exceptional normal situations to reveal how local descriptions can destabilize accepted accounts of the social order. So these people are quite revolutionary. In the breakout I'm going to do today, if you're going to the Enthinkment Circle at enthinkment.com, enthinkment.com, we'll have a breakout for 10 to 15 minutes where you can talk about the Italian Microstoria people. Then we're going to re-theorize in the second part of this. And that's Louis Ralph Ponti. He was my mentor at University of Illinois. I wrote a book with Ronnie Sailors on his approach to Enthinkment, and it captures his dissertation work in 1966 on the conflict model, and then it also corrects an Administrative Science Quarterly Journal article, something that rarely people can do, and they left out the most important thing, the loop from the conflict aftermath of like meetings you have, and then how that aftermath, people got their guns out to get revenge in the next meeting. They didn't get their way on something, you can better believe they're going to be there kind of interfering with somebody who did get their way or trying to get their way. And that latent conflict has both felt conflict and perceived conflict and manifest conflict in a meeting. And organizations try to do conflict resolution to resolve the conflict, or they try to suppress it with rules, or they try to focus attention during a meeting so it doesn't degenerate. And there's sometimes extra organizational tensions, maybe some observers from the outside looking at the meeting. So we go through what is latent conflict, conditions like power imbalances, unspoken rules. In thinking, internal, recognizing the fertile ground where seeds of the future episodes are planted. What are perceived conflicts? Awareness of incompatible goals, different people looking at the same room, like in Tomorrowland, with this different lenses coming from different paths. And in thinking is reflecting how one's own skewed lens filters a situation. Then felt conflict, our feelings and emotions about it, right? Can be about fear, defensiveness, revenge, etc. And in thinking, preventing emotions from colonizing the mind and body of the individuals in the meeting. So, and that's through the heart questioning. Put on the heart glasses, right? The manifest conflict, that's what's left over after one meeting before you go into the next meetings with the same characters. I should know, I was department head. I saw it every week in our department meetings, and I saw it in sideline in individual meetings, and it's just a phenomenon of life in organizations, particularly bureaucracies. Arguments, the manifest conflicts happen in the meeting. Withdrawal, sabotage, silence, turning away, ignoring, etc. And thinking is to critically evaluate the strategic impact of one's observable behavior in the meeting. And antenarrating is deploying together listening and true storytelling principles, etc., to deal with it. But, what you don't deal with in the aftermath of conflict becomes the conflict becoming in the next meeting. And in thinking, we want to prevent deep looping back of so much conflict from meeting to meeting, because it escalates and people get out of control in the meeting, and in a community and in a family. This conflict model applies to families, community development, organizational development and change, etc. But keep in mind that the original Italians, microstoria, and I'm talking about microstorying, an active verb, and in thinking, and also an active verb, and storying, an active verb, because I want to just take it out of just the archival into the past, which I think is very, very important to understand the past as it was then, with the lens then, and not in some postmodern reframing or some modernist, project of reframing the past. And that's where the Microstoria people stand out, the Italian group that I mentioned. So 4-phase methodologies go into story listening, story circles of true storytelling, the Antenarrating mapping, our wheel of life, that kind of thing where we have a flat tire in our health or other aspects, our play, or work is taken over, etc. No family life, whatever. So we're looking at the wheels of life, and that can be drawn very differently and very popular throughout the coaching world. Phase 3, we want to restory, coherence building, participants guided to construct counter-narratives, anti-narratives, micro-storying against whatever's going on. And then the 4th phase, the quantum storytelling. It's beyond the scope of my presentation here to explain to you what is quantum storytelling, but there's multi-temporality entangled, the past, present, and future climbing in together in any moment. It's not the past separated from the future and the present. It's not the present, as if we could just be in the present and there's no future coming in and no past coming in. I mean, that's kind of bullshit. Theorizing. So we want a new theory and quantum storytelling, and they have the annual quantum storytelling conference. Took place in Long Beach, 15th annual last December. So we want ethical foundations, ecological, economic, social justice, a little agential realism from, Karen Barad's work, other people that are involved in quantum storytelling like Gregory Kahete, Leroy Littlebear, and the work of Vine Deloria Jr. These particular mention here of the indigenous pragmatists around the world. Now the scenario here is to apply the wheel of life, deploy the mirror effect. You have that in the socioeconomic economic approach of my French colleagues, but also Grace Ann and I have done mirroring exercises dealing in intense conflict situations in science labs of a university, for example. And how do you think the other groups are going to look at you, and how do you look at them? So we gather that separate information. And a lot of times, if the people have got a heart, put on their heart glasses, they think the other is a lot more demonizing of themselves than is the case, and vice versa. So it's a way open. But we also do storytelling circles and workshops with groups separated in the conflict. And I've had to take people from my own university to a lodge in the backwoods of New Mexico without internet and just deal with it until we could get a open heart practice. So the path forward is to transform our living storying spiral of conflict into pathways of healing through looking at microstorying, antenarrating, Enthinking, etc. And I got a brand new website at https://storying.site. .site is a whole new thing, and I could get it cheaper than .com. And I put together, probably 20 references that I'm adding to the anti-narrative bibliography and the anti-narrative archive at antinarrative.com. So check out enthinkment.com. I'm going to show you a little film. It's fairly simplistic, but if you've never heard of any of these terms before, it'll give you a little overview and make you comfortable. All right, so enjoy the film. I wrote the script, and then these characters and graphics took over, and enjoy it.
So we're living in a pretty divided world, right? Well, today we're going to dive into a really powerful idea. What if the key to healing some of our biggest conflicts isn't in big, grand gestures, but in tiny, personal stories? Yeah, you heard that right. Let's get into it. Okay, so think about it. Every day we're hit with these big, official stories, right? You know the ones I'm talking about. The history in our textbooks, the mission statement from our company, the official story of our town. But have you ever stopped to ask yourself if those big, polished stories are, well, the whole story? Or is there maybe something really important being left on the cutting room floor? And that's the thing. On one hand, you've got that official story. It's so clean, so polished. It has a nice, simple beginning, middle, and end. It's kind of like the highlight reel. But then there's our actual life, right? Our lived experience. And that is messy. It's fragmented, it's confusing, it's often contradictory. And it's right here in the gap between those two versions that things get really, really interesting. You know, there's actually a name for this kind of official story. It's called the grand narrative. This is that big, macro-level, top-down account of things. Think about it like a slick corporate history video, or maybe even a national myth. The whole point is to create this smooth, easy-to-follow plot. And how do they do that? Well, they cherry-pick the facts that fit, and more importantly, they ignore the ones that don't. And in the process, a whole lot of other voices, other stories, just get silenced. All right, so if that grand narrative is the problem, what's the solution? Well, this is where we get to the good stuff. There's a totally different way to look at things, an alternative that completely flips the script and starts from the bottom up. And that alternative is called Microstoria. Now, this idea actually started with some Italian historians, and the whole concept is to deliberately shift our focus to the little story. We're talking about the local, personal experiences of regular, everyday people. It's like instead of looking at the king's decree, you look at the diary of a baker. You're searching for the truth not in the big, loud headlines, but in the quiet, often overlooked details of daily life. And when you put these two side by side, the difference is just, wow, it's huge. The grand narrative, it's all about that straight line, beginning, middle, end. Super neat. Microstoria, on the other hand, it leans into the mess. It accepts that real life is nonlinear, it's fragmented, it's told by a bunch of different people at once. And while that big story carefully picks and chooses its facts to make everything look polished, Microstoria does the exact opposite. It goes searching for the stuff that got thrown out. And believe it or not, there's a name for those discarded bits: anti-narratives. The best way to think about them is like the raw footage of a movie, you know? All the takes, the flubbed lines, the awkward pauses, all the stuff that ends up on the cutting room floor before you see the final, polished film. These are the inconvenient truths, the messy little fragments of reality that just don't fit into that clean, official story. But for Microstoria, this isn't trash. This is treasure. This is where the real story is hiding. Okay, but this isn't just some dusty old academic theory for historians. Nope. A researcher named David Michael Boge has taken this idea and turned it into a hands-on practice for healing. He turned the noun microstoria into a verb, microstory. So what is microstoring? It's the action. It's the deliberate process of actually listening to those little stories, mapping out all those fragmented antenna narratives, and then weaving them together. It's a really dynamic process, and the whole goal is to help a community or a group find some kind of shared meaning, and this is the big one, to start healing some really deep divides. And there's actually a method to it, a 4-step process. First up is just story listening. Simple, right? But it's about listening in a really deep way. Then you do something called anti-narrative mapping, where you chart out all those raw fragments. After that comes restoring, which is all about building new, more inclusive narratives together. And the final step, and this one is pretty wild, is something called quantum storytelling. So the big question is, how does this actually work in the real world? How can telling little stories heal a whole community? Well, to get that, we first have to understand how conflicts get so bad in the first place. You see, big fights and deep divisions, they don't just appear out of nowhere. They tend to spiral. They follow a pretty predictable pattern, where each little issue builds on the last one, feeding this destructive cycle. The way one conflict ends literally becomes the starting point for the next one. It usually starts with what's called latent conflict, tensions just bubbling under the surface. Then it becomes perceived, where people are aware something's wrong.
Then it's felt. The emotions get involved, and by the time it's manifest, out in the open with observable actions, it can feel like it's too late. The aftermath just sets the stage for the whole thing to start over. So the whole point of microstoring is to jump in and break that cycle way back at the beginning, at that latent stage, by bringing those hidden stories out into the open before they have a chance to explode.
And that brings us back to that final, kind of mind-bending step, quantum storytelling. Now, stick with me here. The core idea is that a community story isn't a straight line from past to present to future. It's more like a place where the past, the present, and the future are all happening at the same time, all influencing each other. I know, it sounds a little out there, but think about it like this. Imagine a town that's trying to figure out what to do with an old, shut-down factory. So in that town, the past is still alive, right? It's in the stories the older folks tell about the factory's glory days. The present is the very real story of unemployment, of anxiety about what's next. And the future is all these different competing stories about what the town could become. Should they build a tech park, a shopping mall, a green space? All of those stories, past, present, and future, are tangled up together. They're all happening right now, pulling the community in different directions. And the only way to heal and move forward is to see that all those threads are part of this same story, the same web. And really, that's the ultimate goal of this whole thing. It's about taking those dehumanizing, top-down master narratives, the ones that are always creating an us versus them, and replacing them. And what you replace them with are shared, community-driven stories that come from the bottom up. These new stories aren't static, they're alive, they're inclusive, and they give dignity and a voice back to everyone in the community. So let's pull all this together. What does this all mean for us in our everyday lives? Why should we care about this stuff? What's the big lesson we can take away from all these little stories? Okay, here are the main things to hang on to. First off, be a little skeptical of those big, polished stories. They almost never tell the whole tale. Second, if you want to know what's really going on, you have to listen to the little stories. That's where the truth is. Third, remember that listening isn't just a passive thing. The act of collecting and connecting these stories, microstoring, is a powerful tool for change and healing. And finally, our past, present, and future stories, they're all connective, all tangled up together. So if there's one thing you take away from all this, let it be this. Giving a voice to the stories that have been excluded is a huge deal. It's more than just being a good listener. It's actually a powerful act of resistance. It's pushing back against those overly simple narratives that divide us. And maybe most importantly, it's the very first step toward real, genuine healing. And that leaves all of us with a question to think about. In your own world, at your job, in your neighborhood, maybe even in your own family, what little story needs to be heard? What's being left out? It's a powerful idea, and maybe the way to start is just by asking a better question. Instead of the usual, "How was your day?" What if you asked, "Tell me about one small thing that happened today that surprised you?" Just listen for the fragments, for those little anti-narratives. You might be amazed at what you discover, because sometimes it's the smallest stories that have the power to change